Thank you, everybody, for joining us for our sixth webinar in the ISWP Wheelchair Training Webinar Series by Experts. So today we have Tamara Kittelson, who is an occupational therapist and a RESNA certified ATP SMS, and also an ISWP Basic certified provider from last week, and then a founder of Posture 24/7 and the Eleanor's Project. And she'll be presenting on the topic, linking lying and sitting posture for successful wheelchair seating outcomes. So I will hand it over to Tamara now. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. I'm happy to be with all of you from wherever you are in the world this morning. It's morning for me. I'm speaking from Minnesota in the United States, and really happy to be able to share about this topic because it is truly my passion topic. I feel that it's so important for all of us who are interested in wheelchair provision and who are working in that sector to really understand about the importance of lying posture if we want to have successful seating outcomes. So just a picture of me, and this is what I do, Posture 24/7 and Eleanor's Project, as Kritika said, and my little dog, who is one of my favorite creatures. So this is a little bit of my background. I have been an occupational therapist for quite a long time, 48 years, and I've done a number of things over my long career, but I always also introduce my daughter, Eleanor. Eleanor's Project is her legacy. As you can see, she died at quite a young age, but Eleanor was the person who transmitted me from being solely in the professional world to the parental world, because she was born with cerebral palsy and profound deafness. She absolutely changed my life as I needed to learn how to navigate the world of being a family member and providing care for a person with her particular set of circumstances, as well as continuing to be a professional as an OT. And she was actually the one who led me to completely specializing in what I do now, because I determined that what I wanted to do was work with kids who needed the same kind of gear that she needed. So I do have personal experience of my living with all of the gear that people with disabilities require for mobility and positioning. So these are just a few of our learning objectives. And I don't need to read these to you. You should have all of these in the handout that I provided in advance, so that you would be able to have a chance to review them later on. Okay, so why am I talking about lying posture? The simple reason is that most people spend 1/3 of their time in bed or lying down. Often people with disabilities spend considerably more than 1/3 of their time in bed or lying down to rest. So when our goal is seating success, we really have to consider what happens outside the wheelchair. We may be providing a good wheelchair, we may be providing postural supports in the seating system in the wheelchair, but if we ignore what is happening when the people are not sitting in the wheelchair, we are not going to have success. And I hope today I'll be able to show you why I say that so strongly. So this is just a rhetorical question, but I would say, what do you think? Is a good wheelchair sufficient? Can it, on its own, can wheelchair seating prevent body shape distortions? Can it improve body shape distortions? Can it protect health? What I'm going to tell you today is that a good wheelchair is very, very important, but it's not enough to do these other things. And you'll be noticing today I'll be using the term distortion. I really prefer that term over a word like deformity, which I know is commonly used. As a parent, I recognize that distortion is a bit of a gentler word than deformity. Deformity sounds really harsh, sounds really ugly. And I also think that distortion is more accurate, because much of what we see in terms of altered body shapes in people with disabilities is something that happened gradually over time. And it's something that can also, if we know what to do, be stopped and even reversed so we can turn the clock back and make things better. So I'm going to be giving you an introduction to 24-hour posture care management. And this is just a definition that was published in 2006 in Developmental Medicine and Child Neurology. Really talks about looking at all activities and interventions that are part of an individual's posture and function. And as you can see in the latter part, it actually mentions that it can include special seating, which we already know about in terms of our wheelchair seating work. But it also talks about nighttime support, standing supports. So it's really looking at what a person is doing all of the time in and out of the wheelchair. So there are 3 human postural orientations. First of all, first and foundational, as I say, is lying, followed by sitting and standing, if we think about developmental milestones for children. And I say that lying is first and foundational because when we are born as babies, it's the only thing we're able to do. Our parents, our other caregivers will hold us and give us support and help support our heads so that we can be more upright. But really on our own, all we're able to do is lying. And what we really need to be looking at when we're considering the lying orientation is whether a person is able to not just lie there in any old posture, but are they able to lie with some control and balance and alignment in lying, which is what's going to give them a better foundation for being able to sit, and if they're going to be capable of it at some point, standing as well. So we're going to be looking at some postures here a little bit just to make sure we all sharpen our eyes with what we're looking at. That first picture was actually my little girl, Eleanor, when she was very young. And as you can see, she is trying really hard to stay sitting up in that little chair that is not giving her very much support. We happened to be camping at the time, so she was out of her wheelchair. So if I give you some more lines here at the shoulder and the pelvis, you can see the difference between Banya in the second picture, who is in her seating system with her shoulders above her hips. Everything is in pretty good alignment. She's able to be balanced. She's able to look around and interact. Whereas you look at Eleanor, you can see, I'm going to move my cursor, the beginning of what at the time was a flexible scoliosis. You can see that she's got a pelvic obliquity with one side low. Her shoulders are asymmetrical as well, one side lower than the other. She's working really very hard to stay upright in this position, and it's just not sustainable without postural support. But even more important, over time, these sorts of postures are what take their toll on people's bodies. And now we're going to look at Banya again in her standing frame as a very young child. And you can see how she's standing in pretty good alignment again, fairly straight when we look at the line, showing her midline orientation. But the little boy on the left in his walker is standing in a posture that is actually quite commonly seen in kids who use walkers and have conditions like cerebral palsy. So you can see that while he's able to be functional and use the walker to be able to ambulate, he's actually standing quite off balance. And if you think about what is happening with his alignment, his body overall, what I would tend to say is that there's going to be wear and tear on his joints. There's going to tend to be some overstretching on one side, some shortening on the other side. Having worked with many kids over the years who looked like this in the first image, when they were very young, I've seen them develop by the time they were pre-adolescent or adolescent, dislocated hips, scoliosis, back pain, all kinds of issues. So for this little guy, what I would say is we will not take away his independence in ambulating with the walker. That's really an important skill for him, an important capacity. But we really do need to look at what is happening with him when he's not upright walking in the walker. And what can we do to protect his body to help him grow as straight and as balanced as possible so that he'll be able to continue on into adulthood and be functional and not be hampered by pain and body shape distortions. And for me, what that would mean is when he is sitting down to do schoolwork or whatever, make sure that he has enough support in the chair that he's able to sit straight. And absolutely, essentially, when he's sleeping at night, let's make sure that he is supported so that he's in good alignment. And now we're going to look at lying postures. This is Dominic. He was one of my clients for many years. And I'm giving you some lines to help you see what I'm seeing with his posture. So I asked Dominic to lie down and just assume the posture that he would assume if he wanted to lie down and be comfortable. And this is the posture that he assumed. As you can see, his legs are falling both to one side. That is related to his tight hamstrings and tight hip flexors, which we'll be talking about a little bit later. You can also see with the red lines that I've given you, the sort of asymmetry that we see developing in his shoulders and his pelvis. He's actually developing a pelvic rotation in this posture. And I would suggest that many times when we see pelvic obliquities and pelvic rotations in seating evaluations, that problem may have taken place, it may have been developing over quite a long period of time while a person was sleeping at night. And only when it gets bad enough do we finally see it in the seating evaluation. Now, here is exactly the same boy. Dominic, I did a home visit with him later on at his house, did some supports underneath the fitted sheet of his bed. These were just nothing fancy. They were rolled towels, rolled pillows, cushions, blankets put in the right places. But as you can see, by building up support beneath his knees, we were able to bring him to midline orientation, and he is actually able to lie quite symmetrically and quite comfortably. He began sleeping this way and has been able to grow on into adulthood with a pretty good body shape. So this can be done with simple, informal materials. It doesn't have to be something expensive that you have to go out and buy that's going to cost hundreds or thousands of dollars. And I'll be able to show you some examples of that a little bit later. So these images are just to illustrate for you how linked all of these postures are. We see the same thing no matter the orientation. In this case, the lying posture, the quadruped posture, sitting and standing, we see exactly the same things happening with this person's body. So once we begin to recognize the linkage between all of these postures, we can actually develop a sort of a crystal ball and be able to predict which way a person is going to tend to distort over time. We may not already be seeing it when they're sitting up, but we start looking at the ways that they habitually lie and habitually sleep, and we can pretty much be sure that we're going to start to sooner or later see the same thing when they are sitting upright. And this does not just apply to people who are born with their disabilities. This applies to people who have acquired injuries like spinal cord injuries, traumatic brain injuries. It applies to people who have CVAs, strokes, multiple sclerosis, many of these things that show up in adulthood, we're going to see this same process happen. So who is going to benefit from 24-hour posture care management? It's going to be people who have a limited movement repertoire, and I'm going to show you exactly what I mean by that, and those who are unable to easily change position independently. So these people who don't have a lot of variety in their movement and can't easily change their own position are going to develop contractures or distortions, most likely. It may be sooner, it may be later, but I can almost guarantee you that this is going to become a problem for people. And this is going to be many, if not most, wheelchair users. So what is a limited movement repertoire? I'm going to show you exactly what I mean here. This is a little girl that I met in Peru in 2017. And while her wheelchair was being prepared, I had the opportunity to stand and take a series of images of her, over 15, 20 minutes as she was resting and sleeping on the mat. And of course, you know, she did move at various points, and you can see how she was changing her position. But I hope you can see here that she was changing her position, but there was not a lot of variety in that movement. Now, this image, the last one I'm showing you right now, I really thought that maybe she would start rolling to the other side, but no, she didn't. She continued always to be oriented toward her left side, always landing in basically the same direction. And this is what I'm talking about when I say a person has a limited movement repertoire. It's not that she can't move at all, but it's that she always lands in the same direction in a similar sort of posture over and over and over again. And this means that she is going to be very, very vulnerable to the effects of gravity and time on that asymmetrical posture. And in these images, you can see where already it was showing up in her sitting posture. Now, this little girl was 3. She was getting a wheelchair for the very first time, so she hadn't had one prior to that. She was really tired and kind of cranky. So you can see that from her face. But what I want you to look at here is her lying posture, and then take a careful look at how she is sitting. And I think that you can already see some of the carryover from her habitual lying posture into her seated posture. In particular, I'm going to put my cursor around her left leg, and you can see how that leg is tending toward external rotation and abduction, just as it does when she is in her habitual lying posture. So these orientations are so inextricably linked. It's just crucial that we recognize this and we do something about people's lying posture and not only pay attention to their sitting posture. So what is needed if we're really going to try and do this? We have to understand not only what is happening, but what will happen to the body in the future, as I already mentioned a minute ago. We need to pay careful attention to all postures and activities throughout the day and night. I've already been showing you how we can analyze lying and sitting positions and recognize that they are linked. And we certainly need a team approach. And that means really sharing this information about posture care management with families, with caregivers, with the users themselves, because we as professionals and wheelchair providers are not going to be the people who are helping folks go to bed at night, who are putting their children to bed at night. So we really have to take a very strong team approach and involve everybody if we want to try and help protect people's body shapes for the long term. So how do distorted body shapes occur? These are 2 images of one of my longtime clients. He grew up in an institution in Montana where I lived for many years. And in the first image, you can see that he is prone. He's lying as much on his stomach as he's able to. And in the second image, he's supine. He's lying as much on his back as he's able to. But really, when you look at him, you can see that his body is the same shape, a sort of a C shape, whether he is on his stomach or on his back. And what has happened over time is that he spent so much time lying in an asymmetrical position that gravity has essentially flattened his body against the surfaces on which he was lying. So one way to talk about this is a term called the human sandwich. This term was coined by Noreen Hare many years ago in England. And a human sandwich is basically talking about the fact that we all live and move and experience gravity. We all lie or sit or stand on a support surface, but gravity is constantly pushing us toward the center of the earth. And so if we're not able to control our posture and move in and out of it frequently and easily, flattening is actually going to take place. So why is it so important? We really need to understand about this and try and stop people's body shapes from changing this way. This is just an image I'm sharing with you to really help you see the impact. This was one of my long-term clients in Montana who in the end had a spinal fusion operation, which straightened him up considerably. But his mother shared this X-ray with me so that you can see what is going on inside his body at the same time as we can look at what his body was like outside. And if you look at this X-ray image, you can see that his internal organs are being pushed up into places where they really should not be. You can see the compression of his lungs as his abdominal organs are being pushed out of place because of the change in his rib cage and his spine. So this is a very huge health impact. We know people that have severe scoliosis are at greater risk for aspiration pneumonia, for restrictive lung disease, just not being able to breathe. I, over the years, have known numerous people who have actually died because of restrictive lung disease and pneumonia that was related to their altered body shapes. So what is happening? Very simply, this is another image to show you what has happened, what I was talking about with gravity. We look at babies who have pretty soft skulls when they're born. And if you're looking at a child who is lying in the same or similar posture all the time, say with their head turned to one side, you're going to see these kinds of changes in the skull shape with this blue arrow up here representing gravity acting on the child. And the paper that is referenced here, Kawakami et al., published a study on work that they did in Japan in 2013. And they looked at asymmetrical skull deformity in children with cerebral palsy and actually correlated it with other posture abnormalities and deformities. So these things do not occur in isolation. It's unlikely that you're just going to see only a pelvic obliquity and rotation, or only scoliosis, or only a skull change. These things tend to occur in a sort of a syndrome, and they are correlated, and you oftentimes see them together. So here is Ken again on the orange mat. When movement is limited, eventually the body does not bounce back as we would hope that it would, because over time, literally soft tissue is overstretched in some places. It's shortened in other places. Ligaments get overstretched, and body shape changes take place that cannot be changed because the person just loses flexibility. So we really want to try and take action before this happens. As you can see in this first image, this little baby is in an asymmetrical tonic neck reflex posture, and that's just fine. That's normal for her at her age. But the thing is that pretty soon we know, because she was typically developing, she's going to be moving out of that and be doing something different. The problem with Ken on the orange mat on the right is that he was unable to move out. He was just stuck in one place. There's another image of what can happen with gravity, immobility, and time. This is Abdullah. I met him in Jordan in 2007, and he was 17 at the time that these images were taken. And again, he had spent most of his 17 years as a young person with cerebral palsy, lying on a fascia in a similar asymmetrical posture. And over time, gravity took its toll on his body. And I think you can really see it here when we compare his lying posture. I'm showing you with my cursor his overstretched side. And then at the same time, he has shortened on the other side, and gravity has literally flattened his body against the support surface, which you can see here when we sat him up into a supported sitting position. His mother is pointing with her finger to where his pelvis and his rib cage were in proximity, because she really knew that was not right. And that was very worrisome for her. But you can actually see how this has been the flattened side against the surface on which he was lying for such a long time. So let's talk about leg posture in lying. It's really a domino effect. When tight knee and hip flexors are going to limit leg extension so that legs cannot be straightened out, the legs are going to fall someplace. They're going to look for support. So knees might be together in adduction. Knees may be out to the side in abduction. Or very, very often, it will be both knees to one side, which we call windswept. And that was what I was showing you in the earlier image with Dominic lying with his legs going both to one side. And then I showed you how we were able to correct that. Now, our legs as adults weigh 35% or more of our total body weight. So think about that. Your legs are at least 1/3, or if not more, of your entire body weight. So when you think about that and think about your legs falling over to one side and looking for some support, it's not too difficult to imagine that what that is going to do to the rest of your body. It's going to tend to drag your pelvis over to the same side, as we saw with Dominic. It's going to tend to make changes on your rib cage as well, because your legs are big and heavy. So we need to find ways to support people's lower bodies and support their lower extremities when they are falling into these kinds of positions that I'm showing you on HAMI, the simplified anatomical model. Now, in these positions, why does this put hips at risk of dislocation? I think you can look at the location of the hip joints here, and I'm going to show you now some of these postures in real people that I have worked with. See, HAMI is even there. We were instructing this boy's parents in what was actually happening with his legs. This was a boy I worked with in Peru. What happens is that over time, the ligaments that are holding the hip socket in place, the hip joint in place, and if they're in these extreme asymmetrical postures that are not really what was intended for them to be in, what happens is the ligaments can overstretch. If a person already has shallow hip sockets because they've never been able to crawl and move into standing and bear weight so that they'll have a deeper hip socket, they're going to be at even more risk for hip dislocation. And so, for instance, in this right image to the far right, I can tell you that this is an image of a little girl I worked with from the time she was 1 year old right into adulthood. In this image, when she was 2 years old, I did not see this for the danger that it was. It was a red flag. And at that point in my career, I didn't recognize that this was something that we should do something about. Her little windswept posture. She was flexible. I was able to bring her back to the middle. And I thought that things were going to be okay. But I will tell you that by the time she was 9 years old, this left hip was dislocated. She had a big hip surgery to reconstruct her hip socket. And she ended up with this leg being 3 inches shorter than the other leg. And I really believe that this could have been prevented had I understood better at that point in time that this posture is a danger sign. So I'm hoping that all of you can learn from what I did not know. So what can we do for hips? We really need to look at relaxed, aligned sort of positioning. And this is going to vary for the individual. This was a little girl that we worked with in Peru. And what she was able to tolerate and was comfortable for her was a little bit of hip flexion and external rotation, as you can see in this image. And again, she was just positioned with some simple cushions and rolls that we put between 2 layers of non-slip mesh. This is the sort of thing that you can often find pretty inexpensively for putting beneath rugs. I know in some parts of the world, it's more difficult to find than others. I found it a little bit in Peru, but it's often difficult to find it there. You can also wrap rolls of toweling, for example, with adhesive bandages that will help them stick and stay in place. And as I'll be showing you later, we always put these things underneath a sheet or a blanket or something that the person is lying on. We don't put it on top of the bedding because if it's beneath what they're lying on, it's going to stay in place better. I say 15 to 30 degrees of hip abduction, not because I have any research to show that, but I'm extrapolating what people are talking about in terms of standing in abduction in standing frames, which would be, perhaps 15 to 30 degrees of hip abduction on each side. But of course, that's really going to vary according to your assessment of the person. What is their hip range like? Do they already have a dislocated hip? If they already have a dislocated hip, we're not going to be able to get it back in the socket doing this. I don't want you to think that I'm saying that this is going to be a cure in that way, but we may be able to help limit how much worse it gets. And we may be able to help the person be more comfortable while they're resting. Now, this is just a quick sort of little visual case study of a boy that I worked with in Montana, in the Montana Postural Care Project. You can see his lying posture in January 2017. And a year and a half later, in September 2018, you can see a marked visual difference. I have all of the numbers that I could share with you, but I don't have time for that today. But I have the goniometry measurements of his hip abduction and external rotation that showed absolutely remarkable changes. And how did he do this? Well, here's an image of how he was sleeping prior to my meeting him. And then you can see the change that we made. He began sleeping, as you see in the second image. There was no extra therapies. There was no extra stretching outside of just sleeping this way. He did not have any sort of surgeries or anything like that. The only change in his routine was to change the way that he slept. And this was the result that we were able to see in about 18 months. So I hope that will inspire you to realize that this is something that you can actually do and make a real difference for people. Now, posture also, of course, affects our chest and spine. We've already talked about scoliosis a little bit, what can happen. I want to try and impress upon you how really, really flexible the rib cage and chest are. And I share this image of a little boy that I met in Peru in 2016 to illustrate that for you. You can see from the way he is lying in the first image, he had a very much leftward orientation, that he always tended to turn toward his left, sort of like the little girl in pink that we already looked at. His mother was really worried about his rib cage and had something that she wanted to show me. And so in the second image, those are my hands stabilizing his pelvis, and his mother pulled up his shirt so that she could show me what was worrying her. And I think that you can all see, I'm going to show you with my cursor, this divot here in his rib cage, where literally for most of his young life, he had been spending a lot of time lying on his left side with his little tight left arm resting against his rib cage. So this is just a little illustration of the flexibility of our ribs. They need to be this flexible in order for us to breathe, in order for us to be able to move. But it also means that our chests are very, very vulnerable to distortion. So compression is going to flatten the chest. And in these cross-section images, I'm trying to show you the difference between a typical more rounded chest on the top. Here you can see the sternum, you've got the spinal column on the bottom, and this blue line is known as the sternal spinal line. It's not a real thing. A real landmark in the body. It's an imaginary line that goes between the sternum and the spinal column. And you can see in this image, there's quite a lot of nice room for the person's lungs to work, for their heart to work. That's how it really ought to be. In the lower image, you can see that compression has taken place. This person has a more flattened chest. You can see how that sternal spinal line, that imaginary line, has been shortened because the sternum and the spinal column are now closer to each other as the chest is compressed. And what this means is that there's going to be more risk of cardiopulmonary dysfunction, difficulty breathing, difficulty with health and function. Now, things get really complicated when a person is rotating, as our little girl in pink was, as the boy that you just saw with the groove in his rib cage, because at this point, you can see this red sternal spinal line is now in a diagonal direction. The sternum is going more to one side than to the other, because that is the direction that the person is orienting to. And so this isn't going to happen right away, but over time of always orienting in that same direction, gravity, which I've represented here with these big blue arrows, is pressing down on the person and actually changing the shape of their body. And so as a result, you can see that you're going to have a shortened distance on the side toward which the person is turning, and a longer distance on the side away from where they are turning. And you're seeing differences in the shape, more flattening of the side away from where they are turning and deepening on the side where they're turning. Now, if you think about people that you've seen, I hope that perhaps most of you have seen some of the issues that we notice with people where they have rib flares, where there'll be a posterior prominence of their spine. You know, this is part of all of that same picture that is going into developing scoliosis, which very typically usually includes an element, at least, of rotation. It's not just only usually a straight lateral curve. There is usually some element of rotation as well. And I'm trying to describe that to you so that you can understand it. So here's what rotation is looking like in people's resting postures. Okay, you'll recognize this little girl on the left because we just saw her a minute ago after I straightened her out and supported her in better alignment. But this was the way that she was lying prior to that. And you can see Dominic in one of his sleeping positions that his mother sent me a picture of. This boy on the right, I was teaching a workshop and he actually wanted to show me the way that he slept. He got down on the floor, he put himself in this position, and he told me that he falls asleep this way every night and he wakes up in exactly this same posture. So you can imagine that if you're sleeping this way all night long, say for 7 hours, 8 hours, whatever it might be, it's going to have its effect on your body. And so these rotation type of postures can lead to this. This is one way that you can measure asymmetries. I was explaining to you in the earlier slide how we end up seeing a shortened side and a longer side. And here you can actually see this in the former client of mine. At this point, he had a 45-degree scoliosis. Eventually, in the end, he had spinal fusion surgery after it became much, much worse. But you can see the curve in his spine in the right image, and you can see the differences in the measurements from his sternum to the outer border of his rib cage on the left side image. There was a full 2 centimeters difference between his right and left sides. So what can we do to try and stop this from happening to the chest and the spine? This is another one of my clients in the Montana Postural Care Project, Mary. You can see the way that she was sleeping in an image that her mother sent me when she first got involved with the project. And the right image was as she was lying as straight as we were able to get her to be. She began sleeping with supports and lying. With her sternum in the middle, her chest derotated. That's what this arrow is showing you, derotating her chest so that her sternum would be in the middle instead of going to the left side as it is in the right side image. The supports, as you can see, other than this leg support, the supports are all underneath the sheet. And that allows us to use that top sheet or the top quilt, whatever it might be, can be used as a sort of a draw sheet to be able to shift the person just slightly so that the sternum is in the middle instead of going to one side. And here you can just visually see another little visual case study. You can see the changes that took place in Mary over 18 months and how she was able to lie so much straighter. And I have the image, I have the measurements as well that showed how her actual measurements improved. So is this worth trying? I want to share with you the Montana Postural Care Project results. This was a pilot study that I ran in Montana 2016 through 2018. This is a list of many of the different diagnoses of people that we worked with. You can see that the majority of them had cerebral palsy because that's just how it tends to be. But there were also numerous other conditions that people manifested and that we worked with. I'm actually in the process of writing a manuscript, and my hope and plan is that within the next year, I will have these pilot study results published in a journal so that they will be available for people. But you can read a paper I've written about this that I presented at the International Seating Symposium if you go to the Posture 24/7 website. Now, these were the results that we saw in hip abduction and external rotation, such as I showed you with Andrew. There was a 45% improvement just through adding the posture management lying support at night for people in the study. And we saw a 33% improvement in chest symmetry, such as you saw in Mary, again, simply through adding the positioning and the lying orientation while people slept at night. Now, the other measures that we used included a depth width ratio of the chest, and we saw that 64% of the people experienced improvement. That means that their chests became less flattened side to side. For those beginning with moderate to severe pain on the pediatric pain profile, we saw a 65% improvement. And finally, this is really important, using sleep scales and measures which varied in different years of the study according to the ages of the people. We looked at people's sleep quality. And this was really important for me because oftentimes people think that if you begin implementing positioning while people sleep, that you will be ruining their sleep quality. Actually, in contrast, you can see that a good sized majority of our people in the pilot study actually experienced improved sleep quality. 68% improved the quality of their sleep. And something to keep in mind is that when people with disabilities get improved sleep quality, typically their families have improved sleep quality as well. So we're just going to look pretty quickly at some supports. This is an example of a formal sleep system. These are really expensive and a lot of people will never be able to afford them, but I like to show it anyway. You can see how this was working for my former client, how it was able to bring him into better alignment. But I oftentimes use stuffed animals, everyday sorts of supports. And that's what I'm going to show you here because that's what I have the most experience with, both in Montana, where I lived for years, which is a less resourced area of the United States in terms of funding, and also in Peru with the work that I've done with Eleanor's project since 2004. So this left image was a boy in the Montana Postural Care Project. We repurposed a Comfort Company complete feet leg support to align his legs, but this was a huge stuffed bear that they had in their house already that we used to give him more support. And as you can see in the right picture, this image taken in Peru was a Spider-Man that a family used to help keep their daughter's legs from scissoring, from crossing while she slept. You can use pool noodles, non-slip mesh. These are just some images of things that I've done. This particular girl happened to have Rett syndrome. This is a young lady, Emily, in Peru, showing how roll towels and sheets are being used to bring her into alignment for her resting posture. That's my colleague, Elizabeth, in Peru, positioning her. This was another little girl in Peru. Her mother made her side supports out of sandbags. She actually happens to be a very good seamstress. So she made sandbags for lateral supports for her daughter with a Velcro strap across the front. And of course, that Velcro strap can be made longer as she grows. And then Elizabeth actually carved foam to make a leg support for Lucia. And Lucia's mother then covered it again with matching fabric. I think that Lucia wins the prize for the prettiest sleep system that I've ever seen personally. This is another homemade system by a mama in Peru. What she used were empty water bottles filled with sand and made a fabric cover, again with Velcro straps across the front so that it can be widened as her daughter grows. And her daughter tended to always turn her head to one side. So Elizabeth made a special carved foam pillow to help her head stay in the middle, and then also had carved some foam to help her legs stay in better alignment. This was a little boy that I met in 2012 in Peru, and we actually made him a wearable sort of leg separator because his legs were always crossing. He did not yet have dislocated hips, but he was at very high risk. And so this was a piece of foam that we determined to be the width that he would be able to tolerate and be comfortable. And then one of the people on our team covered it, made a fabric cover for it with a Velcro strap that could go around. And it's something that he could just wear while he was sleeping. This is one of the things that a family of mine in Montana, a family I worked with, made using PVC pipe. Her daughter was sleeping in lying supports at night, but the covers would weigh down on her feet and make her feet go to one side or the other. So she made this frame to hold the covers up off of her daughter's feet. So now I'm going to quickly show you a couple of case studies. This one I'm really happy to share is now available. It was published just last month, actually, in the Resna Assistive Technology Journal. This is Baunya. You've already seen an image of her in her standing frame. I worked with Baunya from the time that she was less than 1 year until last year when I moved away from Montana and came to Minnesota. She has a diagnosis of Aicardi syndrome. She was a Hmong community member. Her parents had been refugees from Laos after the Vietnam War. And for 11 years, her mother got up every 2 hours to turn her from one side to the other because she had been told when Baunya was very little that she needed to do this so that she would not develop pressure injuries. And you can imagine how exhausting this was for Baunya's mother. She had 6 other children as well as Baunya. And so not only was Baunya moved every 2 hours for the first 11 years of her life from one side to the other, but Miley never got a full night's sleep. And you can see this image. I show the 2003 image so you can see that Baunya really turned out with quite a nice, symmetrical, well-aligned little body, although you can certainly see the differences in her muscle tone if you look at her arms and her hands. But by the time we reached 2011, this is one of the only images that I have of her from at that point. You can see that she had become quite kyphotic, quite curved over, which we often see in people who sleep on their side. Her left hip was fully dislocated and migrated back about, she had about a 3-inch upper leg length discrepancy. Her left hip was so severely dislocated. So I could see what was happening to her. Her mother and her community really preferred to avoid invasive surgeries. The only surgery that she has ever had was to place a G tube for feeding. And so I asked them if we could try nighttime positioning and see if that would work to try and preserve her body shape. You can see that she had more than a 2 centimeter difference between her right and left sides. But even more worrisome, her chest was very, very flattened from side to side from sleeping on her side. And I think you can see that difference here. You can see the width of her pelvis. And then if you look at the width of her chest, at her axilla, you can see that her chest is very, very narrow. So it was narrow looking at it from the front, but very deep, flattened side to side, which of course I was concerned about because it could compromise her respiratory function. So I taught Miley how to position Baunya at night. Here she is with her comfy comfortable, familiar quilts and cushions. We de-rotated her chest. Again, I've given you an arrow here to see the direction that she needed to be de-rotated to bring her sternum into the middle so that it wasn't always falling over toward her right side. Miley would level Vanya's pelvis and then de-rotate her chest, putting her to bed overnight. And these are the results that I can show you. Her depth width ratio change. You can see in June 2012, when we began, she was way far out of the typical range, almost immediately dropped down into a good typical range, bumped up here a little bit, but basically was able to remain with her chest in a nice rounded shape and not flattened for the next 6 years while I continued to collect data. And the only thing that did that was changing the way that she slept. Meanwhile, in terms of her right-left ratio, she did at first begin to get worse because we weren't really focusing so much on her chest derotation. We just wanted to help her learn to sleep on her back and make sure that she would be able to do that without any pressure injuries. But as we saw her getting a bit worse here, in 2014, I introduced more firm supports so that we could better derotate her chest. And you can see that in a very short period of time, she popped up and her right-left ratio improved. And she was able to maintain that with a little bit of variation right through until June 2018, which was the last time that I was able to measure her. So she was actually able to go from age 11 to age 17, right through puberty, when we usually see chest shapes become much, much worse. She actually was able to move through adolescence and improve. What were the benefits for her? She was able to sleep supine all night. And because the supports actually distribute the pressure better, she did not experience any skin breakdown. Her mother was able to sleep all night. Her mother volunteered that Vanya's swallowing became faster and easier. She has a very strong cough and good respiratory function. Her mother reported that she typically woke up with relaxed, much more relaxed muscle tone than she had before. And of course, she had improved chest and spine symmetry without surgery. So quickly now we're going to go through Jim. Jim is a man with developmental disabilities. He has mild intellectual disabilities and he was profoundly deaf. But he was able-bodied until multiple sclerosis became part of his life. And he complained of chronic pain in his neck, in his shoulder, and headaches. Every night he was asking for pain medication and he slept very poorly. When I met him in November 2013, this was his preferred position in the left image. I asked him to show me the way that he fell asleep at night, and that's the way that he put himself into position. And then I asked him to straighten himself as much as he could, and that's what you see in the second image. So you'll be able to refer to these in your handouts. We did a positioning trial right there in my office, and I showed him and the people who assist him what kind of positioning they could try and aim for at home. And they did that. They went back home and they sent me pictures of how he looked at first when he went into bed. You can see he was sleeping very asymmetrically. But then they used pillows and cushions that they had in his group home and were able to correct his sleeping posture, as you can see in the second two images. And when I saw him 2 months later, we had not even changed his seating system yet, but his caregivers already reported that he was no longer asking for pain meds at night. He had fewer daytime pain complaints and he was sleeping better. That was before we had even made any changes in his seating system. And by April 2014, his caregivers were reporting that he was sleeping well, all of his chronic pain was gone. And as you can see, he was very happy, sitting better, in his chair and on the mat. So this is an example of somebody with multiple sclerosis with chronic pain and how it made a difference for him in his life. Sleeping better, pain gone, more stable sitting posture, and he didn't have to be taking medication all the time. So this is a quick testimonial from one of my former clients in Montana, Abby. She actually joined us on Monday evening for a 24/7 PCM special interest group meeting where she actually talked about her experience implementing this approach. This is just showing some of what she uses at night. And if you are part of the 24/7 PCM special interest group, I've already posted the link to the recording of that meeting where you can actually hear for yourself how Abby answered questions and what she had to share. I've also posted that link on the Posture 24/7 website in the resources section. So you can also go there to be able to see that link and actually hear from Abby in her own words about what a difference this has made for her as a wheelchair user. These are some of the words that she has given to me, that she has sent to me in the past. If I was to write a review, it would be 5 out of 5 stars and a lifesaver. Every student who wants to be a therapist, doctor, or nurse should learn about postural care. She talks about how it calms her muscle spasms and pain. And she feels like it's really nice to have a place to let my guard down and my body will be safe because she feels so vulnerable. So I'd really encourage you to go and click on that link in the SIG Resna Connection group or on the Posture 24/7 website so that you can have a chance to hear from Abby. And if there are any questions now, I'd be happy to entertain them if we have any time. Otherwise, you can certainly feel free to reach out to me with questions that you have. You do have my information in your handout. And oh my goodness, now I get to see all of you, how many are here. And some of these are people that I know. I have some friends here. So I'm very happy to see all of you that have been joining us.
Thank you so
and
much.
Trish Toole is sharing the link, perhaps. And I'm just so glad that you spent this time with me today. I hope that this will inspire you to all go and be working with the folks in your world and give this a try.
Thank you so much,
Thank you for the time.
Thank you. This was a very intriguing and an informative presentation. We really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this presentation for us. We actually ran out of time, but I would like to just take on a few questions if that's okay with you and others. That came
It's
in
okay
through
with
the
me.
chat. Thank you so much. So I'll start from the first. So Ijazul Haq had a question. Hi, Tamara. In flexible pelvis, if let's suppose right ASIS is upward than left ASIS, then which side of the cushion we will raise during sitting in wheelchair?
Okay, so you're talking about the right being high and the left being low?
Yes.
Is that?
That is the comment, yep.
And if it's and it's flexible, then you are going as long as it's flexible. If it's not flexible, of course, you're going to have to accommodate it and provide support under that high side. But if it is still flexible, then you should be able to actually, hopefully, be able to use a more level cushion and use a pelvic belt that is appropriately angled and adjusted to be able to stabilize it. If it's not if you're not able to do that on a flat cushion, typically with a flexible pelvis, we should be able to correct that by just having a flat cushion and a well-positioned pelvic belt. I don't think you're going to want to be able to raise, you're not going to want to raise it on one side or the other if it's flexible, because you may be making things worse by doing that. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Thank you so much. Ijaso, let us know in the chat if that made sense to you. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank you once again for all your hard work for putting this presentation together for us and for walking us through patiently for 60 minutes. And thank you so much for all your time. We really enjoyed this presentation. So for those who've asked the handouts and the recording, I've actually shared the handout ahead of this meeting. If you had not received it, I will follow up with the recording and the handout where you can find Tamara's contact information. Is there anything else you would like to say, Tamara, before I close out?
I would just like to say that I hope all of you will go out and start trying this. I really, really do. And don't start off with the very most complicated, difficult person that you know. Start off with somebody where the person and the family are open-minded and they're willing to work with you. And maybe you just see some slight problems that you want to try and correct. Because if you begin to have some success with small problems, it will increase your confidence. And as your confidence increases and you have success with that person, then that person is going to be able to be an ambassador for you and be able to share with other people how it worked for them. Just like Abby is now an ambassador and wants to share with people how it's worked for her. So I hope you will all try this. That's all I have to say.
Thank you so much, Tamara. Thank you again. Thank you once again for everyone who took the time to join us today. So I'll close the meeting now, and then I will share the recording and the presentation in a follow-up email. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day, evening, afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.